Sinister Stories.
Mallory was late, as usual, rushing through the crowded mall to meet her friends at the movie theater. She had been running errands all day and was desperate for a moment to freshen up before catching the movie. As she passed the food court, she saw the restroom sign and made a beeline for the entrance. The public restroom was surprisingly empty for a busy Saturday afternoon. Mallory sighed with relief, grateful for a moment of quiet away from the hustle and bustle of the mall. She went to the sink, washed her hands, and checked her reflection in the mirror. As she did, a cold draft made her shiver. The hair on the back of her neck stood on end, and she felt a sudden, inexplicable sense of unease. Ignoring the feeling, she made her way to the stalls. As she entered the first one, she heard a faint, rhythmic tapping sound echoing through the restroom. At first, she thought it might be another person, but when she looked around beneath the barriers of the stalls, she realized she was alone. The sound seemed to be coming from the last stall. Curiosity got the best of her, and she decided to investigate. The tapping grew louder as she approached the final stall, her heart beating faster with each step. She hesitated for a moment before reaching out to push the stall door open. The door creaked as it swung on its hinges, revealing an empty stall. But as she stepped closer, she noticed something strange. The back wall of the stall was covered in old, faded graffiti, names and dates scratched into the tiles. Most were illegible, but one message stood out in fresh, bold letters. "Do not turn around." Mallory's breath caught in her throat. Her instinct was to turn around and see who or what had written the message, but fear rooted her in place. Her pulse quickened and she could hear her heartbeat pounding in her ears. After what felt like an eternity, she gathered the courage to turn her head slightly, just enough to see her reflection in the mirror above the sinks. But her own face was not what she saw. Instead, the mirror reflected the face of a woman with hollow eyes and a twisted, sinister grin. Mallory gasped and spun around, but the restroom was still empty. Her heart raced as she looked back at the mirror, but the woman's face had disappeared, leaving only her own terrified reflection. Panicked, Mallory rushed out of the stall and washed her hands quickly, trying to steady her breathing. She turned to leave the restroom, but the door wouldn't budge. She pulled harder, but it remained firmly shut. "Help!" she shouted, banging on the door. Her voice echoed through the empty restroom, but no one answered. She tried her phone, but there was no signal. Desperate, Mallory tried the door again, and this time it opened with ease. She stumbled out of the restroom, her heart racing. She glanced back over her shoulder and saw the door slowly swing shut behind her, as if it had a mind of its own. She hurried to the movie theater, trying to shake off the unnerving experience. She didn't tell her friends what had happened, not wanting to sound crazy or ruin the outing. But throughout the movie, she couldn't stop thinking about the mysterious woman in the mirror and the chilling warning in the stall. Days passed, and Mallory tried to put the incident behind her. But the more she tried to forget, the more it haunted her. She started noticing strange occurrences in her own home. A cold draft in the hallway, doors that wouldn't open or close properly, and mirrors that seemed to show fleeting images of the woman's face. That night, Mallory woke to the sound of rhythmic tapping coming from her bathroom. She lay in bed, frozen with fear as the tapping continued. The same chilling sensation she felt in the mall restroom washed over her. Gathering her courage, Mallory got out of bed and crept toward the bathroom. The tapping grew louder as she approached. She reached for the light switch, but the light flickered and went out. In the darkness, she heard a faint whispering voice.
"Do not turn around."
Mallory spun around, but there was no one there. The voice seemed to echo from every corner of the room. She stumbled back in fear, her heart pounding. The rhythmic tapping grew louder, faster, and the whispering voice repeated its warning.
"Do not turn around."
Terrified, Mallory ran back to her bedroom and slammed the door shut behind her. She could still hear the tapping and whispering, but she tried to drown it out with the sound of her own ragged breathing. The next day, Mallory did everything she could to avoid looking in mirrors or hearing any tapping sounds. She even covered the mirrors in her house with sheets, but the strange occurrences persisted, following her wherever she went. She decided to visit the mall again, hoping to confront whatever was haunting her. As she approached the restroom, her fear grew stronger, but she pushed herself to go inside. The restroom looked the same as before, empty and silent. Mallory walked to the final stall and saw the graffiti on the wall. This time there were more messages, written in fresh, bold letters. "Do not turn around. She's watching. Don't look back." The messages seemed to pulse with a sinister energy. As Mallory stood there, she heard the tapping sound again, this time coming from the mirror. Her reflection stared back at her, but her eyes seemed different, haunted. She turned around, and there stood the woman with the hollow eyes and twisted grin. Mallory tried to scream, but no sound escaped her throat. The woman reached out, her cold skeletal hand wrapping around Mallory's arm. She tried to pull away, but the woman's grip was unbreakable. In the mirror, Mallory watched in horror as her reflection changed. Her eyes grew hollow, and a sinister grin spread across her face. The woman released Mallory's arm, and she stumbled back, gasping for air. She rushed back to the restroom door, not daring to look back. The door was once again jammed, and then she heard the whispering voice one last time.
"Do not turn around."
Mallory's pulse raced as she slammed her shoulder against the restroom door, trying to force it open. It refused to budge, and she could still hear the ominous whispering echoing in her ears. The woman's sinister face lingered in her mind, and she knew she needed to escape this terrifying place. After a few tense moments of struggling, the door finally gave way, and Mallory stumbled out into the mall corridor. She quickly regained her footing and glanced back at the restroom door. It stood eerily ajar, the darkness within beckoning her to return. The whispering had stopped, but her heart still pounded in her chest. Without wasting another second, Mallory hurried away from the restroom, her only thought to get as far away as possible. She didn't look back, determined to keep moving until she reached the safety of the movie theater, where her friends were waiting. As she entered the theater, she quickly composed herself and took her seat, trying her best to seem unfazed. Her friends greeted her with smiles, unaware of the ordeal she had just experienced. Mallory managed a weak smile in return, but her mind was still clouded by the unsettling encounter. Throughout the movie, Mallory's thoughts drifted back to the restroom, the woman's hollow eyes, and the chilling warnings. She couldn't focus on the film, her imagination replaying the events over and over again. When the movie ended and her friends chatted excitedly about their favorite scenes, Mallory made an excuse to leave early. On her way home, Mallory felt a sense of paranoia creeping up on her. The familiar landmarks of her town seemed foreign and threatening, casting long shadows under the dim streetlights. She drove quickly, desperate to reach the safety of her home. Once she arrived, Mallory locked the doors behind her and checked every window to make sure they were secure. She felt a faint shiver as she entered her bathroom, remembering the tapping and the whispers from the night before. She turned on the lights and took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. The bathroom appeared normal, but Mallory's fear hadn't dissipated. She quickly brushed her teeth and washed her face, avoiding her reflection in the mirror. Just as she was about to leave, a faint whispering voice echoed in the room. "Do not turn around." Mallory's heart sank, and she knew she had to resist the urge to look. Instead, she hurried out of the bathroom, closing the door behind her. She made her way to her bedroom and crawled into bed, pulling the covers tightly around her. Sleep was elusive, her mind racing with fear and uncertainty. The next morning, Mallory woke to a strange feeling in the air. The sun shone brightly through her bedroom window, but the world outside seemed muted and distant. She tried to push aside the eerie sensation and went about her morning routine, determined to shake off the lingering dread. Throughout the day, Mallory couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time she passed a mirror or reflective surface, she would catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of her eye. A shadow, a flash of movement. She avoided the bathroom altogether, her fear of encountering the whispering voice too much to bear. As evening approached, Mallory felt a sense of foreboding. She decided to confide in her best friend Sarah about the strange occurrences she had been experiencing. Sarah listened attentively as Mallory recounted her story, her face pale with concern. "That sounds terrifying," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "Maybe you should stay with me tonight, just to be safe." Mallory considered the offer, but ultimately decided to stay in her own home. She didn't want to bring the haunting presence with her to someone else's house. Sarah reluctantly agreed and promised to check in on her the next day. That night, Mallory tried to relax and watch television, but the unease persisted. As she settled in for bed, she heard a faint tapping coming from the hallway outside her bedroom. Her body tensed, and she gripped the blankets tightly. The tapping grew louder, echoing through the house. Mallory squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself not to move or make a sound. The whispering voice spoke again, this time with more urgency.
"Do not turn around."
Mallory lay frozen in her bed, her mind racing. The voice repeated its warning over and over, until the tapping suddenly stopped. The silence was suffocating, and Mallory dared not open her eyes or move until exhaustion finally took hold, and she drifted into a fitful sleep. The next morning, Mallory woke to find her bedroom door ajar. A chill ran down her spine as she approached the door, her hand trembling. She pushed the door open and walked down the hallway, half expecting to hear the tapping again. The house was silent, the usual creaks and groans absent. Mallory went to the bathroom, bracing herself for whatever she might find. The room was empty, but as she looked in the mirror, she saw something that made her blood run cold. A message had been etched into the mirror overnight. "Do not turn around." Mallory stared at the message etched into the mirror, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She could hardly believe what she was seeing, knowing she had left the bathroom empty and untouched the night before. The whispered warning echoed in her mind, and she tried to steady herself, resisting the urge to turn around. Instead, she quickly left the bathroom and returned to her bedroom. She needed to think, to understand what was happening to her. The fear she felt was unlike anything she had ever experienced before. As she paced around her room, she realized she needed answers. She grabbed her phone and began searching online for any information about hauntings or ghost stories in the area. She found little about the mall restroom specifically, but she did stumble upon a local legend about a woman who had disappeared in the mall years ago. According to the story, the woman had gone to the mall restroom late one night and never came out. Security footage showed her entering the restroom but never leaving. Her body was never found, and some believed her spirit lingered, haunting the restroom. The legend struck a chord with Mallory, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was dealing with the ghost of this woman. The tapping, the whispers, the haunting messages, it all seemed to fit. Determined to put an end to the torment, Mallory decided to return to the mall one last time. She wanted to confront whatever spirit was haunting her and find a way to free herself from its grip. Armed with a flashlight and a sense of resolve, she headed back to the mall that evening. The mall was quieter than usual, the crowds thinning as the night approached. Mallory made her way to the restroom, her heart pounding in her chest. She entered the restroom, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The restroom seemed empty, but Mallory knew better than to let her guard down. She approached the final stall, the one where she had first seen the mysterious messages. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw the same graffiti on the wall, even more prominent than before. "Do not turn around. She's watching. Don't look back." Mallory steeled herself and called out, "Who are you? What do you want?" Her voice echoed through the restroom, but there was no immediate response. She took a deep breath and walked toward the sink, her flashlight casting eerie shadows on the mirror. She stared at her reflection, trying to remain calm. The rhythmic tapping began again, soft at first, then growing louder. The whispering voice spoke, echoing through the room.
Do not turn around.
Mallory's hands shook as she gripped the sink, her knuckles turning white. The tapping continued, faster now, filling the restroom with an unsettling rhythm. She kept her eyes on the mirror, trying to avoid the temptation to turn around. The voice repeated its warning, growing louder, more insistent. Do not turn around. Mallory fought the urge to spin around, but the tension in the room was overwhelming. She could feel a presence behind her, the cold draft making her shiver. The voice spoke again, this time with a hint of anger.
Turn around.
The sudden change in the command startled Mallory, and she gasped. Against her better judgment, she turned slowly to face whatever was behind her. In the dim light, she saw the woman with hollow eyes and a sinister grin. The same woman from the mirror, her pale skin almost glowing in the darkness. Mallory's heart raced, and she tried to back away, but the woman's gaze held her in place. "Why are you haunting me?" Mallory managed to ask, her voice trembling. The woman's grin widened, and she took a step closer. "You turned around. I have been trapped here for years, and now you will join me." Mallory's fear reached a fever pitch as the woman lunged toward her, her skeletal hands wrapping around Mallory's throat. Mallory struggled against the woman's grip, but it was as though she were made of steel. The woman's hollow eyes bore into Mallory's soul, and she felt herself slipping away. The world around her faded, and her struggles grew weaker. The last thing she heard was the woman's chilling voice. "Do not turn around." Mallory's body went limp, and she collapsed to the ground. The woman watched with satisfaction as Mallory's spirit left her body, another victim claimed by the haunted restroom. From that night on, the mall restroom gained a reputation as a cursed place. People avoided it, and those who dared enter spoke of strange occurrences, tapping sounds, whispers, and fleeting glimpses of a woman with hollow eyes and a twisted grin. Mallory's disappearance became another unsolved mystery, just like the woman before her. Her story ended in darkness, trapped in a cycle of fear and torment. The haunted restroom remained, waiting for its next unsuspecting victim. And now with today's date etched on the wall.